Excuses go a long way back in time. All the way back to the first man. Genesis chapter 3, after they had eaten the fruit, the Lord addressed Adam and called him. And Adam said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me the tree, and I did eat. Don't blame me. Look at her. That was his excuse. And so excuses go back to the very beginning of time. And so it's not anything new. And we read about excuses throughout the pages of the Bible. And we'd like to do a little on the definition of the word very briefly first to get in our minds a little bit of the idea of what an excuse is. There is a Greek word in John 15 and 22, prophasis, and it is rendered this way in the King James, John 15 and 22, If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not sinned. But now they have no cloak for their sin. They have no cloak. They have no covering for their sin. And so sometimes an excuse is a covering for sin. When Adam said, Don't look at me, look at her, he was trying to cover the fact of his sin. And so he says, the buck don't stop with me. You need to go further. And so he passed the blame on to his wife. Any of you women married to any of the children of Adam? Your husband ever blamed you for anything? Woman driver? Something of that nature? So that's what an excuse is. There's another Greek word, though. There's some more that we're not going to be able to touch on in our time tonight, but it's paraetomai, and it's found in that parable in Luke 14 where he told about the great feast. And it says in verse 18, And they with one consent began to make excuse. And that word is defined in the Greek when they began to make excuse why they could not go to the great feast. It means they were begging off. They were begging off. They didn't want to go to the feast, and so they began to say different things. I've bought a field, I've bought a yoke of oxen, I've married a wife. So they didn't really want to go. They were begging off. They wanted to get off the hook. That's what Adam was doing. I want off the hook. Don't look at me. Look at her. Daniel Webster says that an excuse is something offered as a justification or a grounds to be excused, to be justified. You've probably heard about the little kid who came to school and teacher says, Where's your homework? He said, A goat ate it. You've probably heard that, and you might have used it before, by the way. But that's an explanation. That's a justification for getting out of the blame that would be upon you. And I've read that an excuse is often a lie covered by the thin skin of reason. A lie covered with the thin skin of reason. Now, excuses are old, and one of the great men of the Old Testament used excuses, and we're going to look at him tonight. And he's in Exodus chapter 3. His name, of course, is Moses. We're going to look at this man as he used excuses to try to get out of what God wanted him to do. I'm not here to convince you to evangelize. Others have already done that. But we're going to discuss tonight why we should not try to excuse ourselves from doing the work of evangelization. In Exodus chapter 3, God, of course, appears to Moses by way of a burning bush and speaks to him in that way. And in Exodus chapter 3, you might want to turn to this text and read along and notice some of the comments. In Exodus chapter 3, it says in verse 3, Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Now, we're about to read about some excuses that Moses makes to God, but I want you to see the attitude of Moses before he makes these excuses. It says that Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. I don't know how he hid his face. Maybe he hid his face like this. Maybe he covered his face like this. Maybe he put his arm over his face. He hid his face. He was afraid to look upon God, afraid to look upon Him. Now here's a man about to make some excuses, and yet he's fearful of God. And why we're saying that is because, we fear God. We're here tonight, aren't we? We come to worship God. We come on Wednesday night. We come on Sunday night. We come to Bible class on Sunday morning. We really respect God and believe in God and fear God. We're going to read about a man who's about to make a lot of excuses. And so we want to see that just because we fear God does not mean that we're always going to obey Him. Here's a man that feared Him. Jesus told a parable about a lord, a master, that had these 3 servants, and he gave one 5 pieces of money. He gave another 2 pieces of money. And he gave another 1 piece of money. And when he returned, the man that had the 1 talent said, he said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. Lord, I knew you were capable of great things, impossible things. And he said, I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. I was afraid of you. I was sorely afraid of you. And so I didn't do anything. You see, you can fear God and still not obey God. And to that servant, the master said, Thou wicked and slothful servant, cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. And so what we need to see right at the first of our discussion about Moses was that he was a man that feared God to the point that he hid his face from Him. But fearing God is not sufficient, is it? Ecclesiastes 12 and 13 says, Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Just because we fear God doesn't mean we're going to always obey Him. I met a young man years ago. He called me. I barely even remember meeting him. He was in the Tarrant County Jail. He said, he left me a message, please come and visit me. And I went down there and he said, I'm afraid I'm going to go to the state penitentiary. I'm going to go to Huntsville, to the big prison house down there. Please go and talk to the judge and try to get me in a juvenile rehabilitation program. And I went to the judge. It did no good. But he got out of jail. But just a short while after, he was back in jail, and I heard later that he went on down to Huntsville, the place he feared to go. He feared going down there, and yet he still broke the law a second time and doing that which he was fearful of doing. And so you may fear God, but don't make the mistake of believing that that's all that there is. Peter said, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth God and keepeth His commandments is acceptable unto Him. Joshua said in Joshua 24 and 14, Fear the Lord and serve Him. Fear Him and serve Him in sincerity and truth. And so let's not deceive ourselves in believing that we fear God, but we don't have to evangelize. We fear God, but that's, we come and worship Him, but we don't have to go out and seek lost souls, and that'll suffice and get us by. Oh, don't make that mistake. But now, here's a man who fears God And yet he's going to make several attempts to try to get out of what God wants him to do. Notice later on in this chapter of Exodus chapter 3, the Lord said, I want to send you down to Egypt, and I want you to appear to Pharaoh, and I want you to lead my people out. Now notice what Moses says in verse 11. And Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I? Now this is a pretty weak dodge. It's sort of like one of those little dodges we use sometimes. We need you to teach a class for us, and so would you please prepare to teach? Who, me? You talking to me? You need to get somebody else. Go over here and choose someone. That's what Moses is saying. Who, me? Who am I? Who am I to do this? Pretty weak dodge, but we use it, don't we? And Moses here is using something that's probably pretty familiar to us and something that we've used ourselves. I can remember I used this one. I was asked to teach a class. I used that illustration, and that's the very thing that happened to me. A fellow said, we need somebody to teach the 5th and 6th grade class. And I said, who, me? No, not me. You want somebody else. And so I was trying to get out of my responsibility and an obligation that we all have to help to teach whenever we can. And I was using that, a very weak dodge, a weak excuse. But that's not all that Moses uses. In verse 13, or verse 12, though, I'd like to read that. And he said, God says, certainly I will be with thee. I'm going to be with you, Moses. Don't say who, me. I'm going to be with you. But then Moses says in verse 13, Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers hath sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? Don't that kind of tickle you a little bit? Just think about the excuse, you know. Who am I going to say? They're going to say to me, who sent you? What am I going to say to them? Isn't that kind of weak? Isn't that weak? The God of heaven is talking to you, and that's the reason. Well, I won't even know who to tell them. Who's sending me? That's kind of pitiful, isn't it? Our excuses are very pitiful when we'll stop and examine them and weigh them out and look at them. But later on, Moses makes another stab at trying to get out and trying to not fulfill what God wanted him to do. In chapter 4 and verse 1, and Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice, for they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto me. And so he's saying, look, it won't do any good. They won't believe me anyway. And so God all along is assuring him and giving him the reasons why he can do it. I'll be with you. And I'm going to give you these signs so that they will believe you. But then Moses, these things are not working. They're not working out, you know, these excuses. He's using them, these little attempts. And so then Moses says in verse 10, and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither hitherto, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. Oh Lord, I can't talk. I can't speak. I'm not a good speaker. I'm slow. It sounds like a used car salesman trying to tell somebody why he can't sell a car. You know, he's speaking eloquently about how he cannot speak eloquently. And so it's sort of like that song, Oh Susanna. It rained all night the day I left. The weather was so dry. It was so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Moses saying, oh Lord, I can't speak eloquently. And all the time he's speaking so eloquently. He used all these dodges to get out of the responsibility that he had. And these, it didn't even make any sense, did it? Here he is talking to the God of heaven, the God who created everything, and telling him, I can't go down and speak to this mere man. And he's always telling God you see, excuses really don't make any sense. Here he is telling God, speaking so clearly and precisely, how that he can't speak clearly and concisely. But that's just the way excuses are. And I'd like to refer back to that great feast over here in Luke chapter 14. There was excuses there. They're ridiculous. They're ludicrous. And Jesus tells this parable to show us how, excuses don't work. And in this parable, he says, a certain man made a great supper and bade many. He invited people to come to this great feast, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all, with one consent, began to make excuse. Now, what we're talking about now is excuses really don't make much sense. Oftentimes they're just a lie with the thin skin of reason pulled down over them. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground. I must needs go and see it. I pray thee, have me excused. I can't come to your feast because, you see, I've bought a field. And so just excuse me for not coming. What's wrong with going to see the field another day? Is it going to run away? Is it going to go somewhere? You can't go see it next week. You have to go see it right now. What's going to happen? You see, excuses don't even make any sense. They're stupid. They're ridiculous. And yet, we use things just pretty similar to this. Verse 19, and another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen. I go to prove them. I pray thee, have me excused. That's sort of like saying, I bought a car, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to see what kind of car I bought. I'm going to go see if it runs. I'm going to see if it has seats in it. I'm going to go see if it even has any windows in it. You ever bought a car like that? Unproven, untested? These excuses don't make any sense. They're without reason. And then the final one, this is the icing on the cake. And another said, I have married a wife. You think that's a son of Adam? I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. You know, that's supposed to explain everything. I'm going to try that. I'm going to use that excuse. Next time a policeman stops me and said, did you see that stop sign back there? I've married a wife. That explains everything. Oh, I tell you, these excuses are something. And Moses' his was just as ridiculous as the others. And so they just don't work. And we hear all kinds of excuses, and we've used all kinds of excuses. You know, I've rationalized these things and said, well, what about this? You know, we'll say, why don't I go out and evangelize? Well, I'm just too busy. Or, I'm too tired. Or, I don't know how. Or, we might say, I'm too old. Well, I'm glad Brother Cotham and Brother Faircloth have been here and to show us that's no excuse. You know, I've knocked doors in the heat of the summer, on dusty, rocky roads and in an old mobile home park with 85-year-old people. I've knocked doors with them. And so that's no excuse. And someone might say, well, I'm too old. Or I'm too young. Or, well, I've got just too many kids. Or I only finished the 6th grade. You know, one excuse is about as good as another, isn't it? We might say, oh, I got an uncle who lives down in Tuscaloosa. Or, I used to get a spanking when I was a kid. You know, just one excuse is, you know, why don't we just use excuses like that? You know, one's as good as another. And by the way, when we're talking about these excuses, you know, it reminds me of Malachi 1 and 8. When the prophet said, and if you offer blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee or accept thy person? You know, try these excuses on your boss. You know, your boss says, in the morning when you come in, I want all these things taken care of. I'm too tired. I'm too busy. I'm too old. Try that on your boss. See if he'll accept it. And then ask him for a raise when you get through. Try getting a job that way. I'm not educated. I don't have any experience. See if it pleases your boss. See if it pleases your teacher. You know, when your teacher says, well, where's your homework? I was too busy. Will it work? No, you're going to get an F. You're going to get a 0. And so it won't. Try your excuses on your boss, on the teacher, out in the world, and you'll see how ridiculous they are. And if they won't work on the teacher or on the boss, why do we think they'll work on God? They're not going to work on God. Excuses do not work. And boy, do they get ridiculous. We're not through with how silly and weird they are. Now this is Moses. He's not a spring chicken. He's 80 years old. He's making these excuses. His brother's older than he is. You ever read Aaron's excuse over there in Exodus 32? What about the golden calf? Moses came down off Mount Sinai. There they were worshiping the golden calf. You ever read that? And it says, and it came to pass as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, this is Exodus 32 and 19, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot. And he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. And he took the calf which they had made and burned it in the fire and ground it to powder and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink it. See, Aaron's watching this all the time. Breaking the tables of stones, grinding that thing in the powder, making them drink it. Oh, Aaron's watching this all the time. And Moses then turns to Aaron. And he said unto Aaron, what did this people unto thee that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not thy anger of the Lord wax hot. Thou knowest the people, that they are set on mischief. They said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what is become of him. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let him break it off. So they gave it me, and I cast it in the fire. And there came out this calf. I threw that gold in the fire, and the calf just come out. This is a grown man. This is a grown man here saying this. This is not a little kid. You know, they said, the teacher says, where's your homework? A goat ate it. That sounds better than this one, doesn't it? It has a little more reason to it. You know, an excuse is oftentimes a lie with the skin of reason pulled down over it. Oh, Aaron doesn't even have any reason on it. Man, it's just a bald-faced lie. Well, Aaron's excuse is just pitiful. And that's what excuses are. And when we look at our own selves and we're wondering why we haven't evangelized as God wants us to, and we sit around and watch them Super Bowls, and we've sat around and we've ate popcorn and we've read the newspaper, and we wear those chairs out, we're wore out, we break them down, those old couches get wore out, we're just sitting around. We need to think about the excuses and how real they really are. And then I think the excuses, though, really cover up our real attitude. Because in Exodus chapter 3, when Moses says, well, I'm not an eloquent man, God says in verse 11, and the Lord said unto him, who hath made man's mouth, or who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? And I'm going to read the New King James Version on this answer. Verse 13. And here's Moses' answer. But he said, O my Lord, please send by the hand of whomsoever else you may send. Please send, Lord, by the hand of whomsoever else you may send. You know what Moses is saying? Send somebody else. You know, he was saying, well, they won't believe me. Who, me? Me? Go to Egypt? Who, me? And when he was saying, they won't believe me. Well, who am I going to tell them sent me? Oh, I'm not an eloquent speaker. You know what Moses wanted all along? Send somebody else. That is covering up. See, it was a covering. John 15 and 22, it was a covering. He was covering his real attitude. That's what an excuse is. It covers. I'm too busy. No, that's not the problem. I'm too old. I'm too young. No, that's not the real problem. Real problem is not you're too old or you're too young or you've got too many kids or you don't have enough time or you're not educated enough. That's not the real problem. That's only covering up the real problem. There is a major flaw here somewhere in our lives when we begin to make excuses. You know that. That's right. That's true. We've got a real problem. Now, what was Moses' problem? Well, I don't believe Moses had very much faith. God says, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. I don't believe Moses believed that, do you? But you know the Lord makes the same promise to us, doesn't He? Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them, and lo, I'll be with you. even to the end of the world. Do we believe that when we say, "Oh, I'm too busy"? "Oh, I just that's not what I'm set out to do"? Are we covering up the fact that we just don't really believe God's going to be with us? Or maybe we're just covering up the fact that we are scared, that we are afraid. Is that your problem? You're afraid? Then I invite you to read Revelation 21 and 8. I invite you to see that the very first thing mentioned in Revelation 28 or 21 and 8 is who's going to be cast into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. The very first kind of people there are the fearful. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. The fearful. God hates the fearful. He hates that. That's an abomination to Him. Why? Fear never has done anything. Fear won't teach a class. Fear won't invite anybody to church. Fear won't... If you ask any of these preachers here, the first 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 sermons they preached, if they were afraid before they got up, if they copped out on account of fear, they'd never preached. You'll never hear a sermon. Nobody would ever preach a sermon if we just said, "Well, I'm afraid to preach," because none of us would preach. And so, sure, there's going to be fear. Fear's a part of our lives. You say, "Well, what am I going to say to these people?" I can recall one time that I was out of duty. I wasn't a faithful Christian. I was backslidden. I was in sin. And one day, an elderly sister in Christ called me. And about all I remember of that conversation was in a very sweet voice. She said, "Richard, why don't you come back to church? Why don't you come back to church?" Now, I hadn't thought about that much at the time. I appreciated that call because that was one thing that motivated me to come back. But have you ever called a delinquent member to say something like that? Have you ever called anybody? Have you ever said, "Hey, this old brother so-and-so or this is sister so-and-so, they hadn't been here in a long time"? Have you ever thought about calling them? What goes on in your mind when you call them? What am I going to say? You get a little queasy in your stomach. You get a little nervous. What am I going to say? Well, she probably went through this for me. She probably thought maybe for hours, "Well, should I call Richard? What time of the day should I call him? What am I going to say? How am I going to approach this? What exactly what would be the right thing to say?" She probably went through all of this. Butterflies in her stomach. Getting nervous for me. If she did that for me, and somebody's probably done that for you somewhere along the line, somebody's overcome the butterflies to knock on your door, to ask you for a Bible study, for something. Somebody's had to go through nervousness and fear for you. Were you worth it? Sure you were. Your soul's worth it. Well, what about the next guy? We're going to have to go through that. Someone said earlier today they got nervous when they knocked on doors. And it wasn't always the easiest thing to do. And surely it is not. But we cannot use the excuse of fear. It reveals, though, when we start making excuses, it reveals we've got a problem. It may be fear, it may be because we don't believe in God, and it may reveal that we really don't love God. Mike mentioned a minute ago, if we love the Lord, we will obey Him, John 14 and 15. And so if you're not obeying the Lord, you're not evangelizing, you're not going out and trying to spread the gospel in some way, then you don't love God because you're not obeying His commands. And so it reveals that about us. It reveals that we don't love the lost. Hereby know we love. How do we know love? Because Christ laid down His life for us. That's how we know love. He did something for us. Are we doing anything for the lost? If we say no, then you don't love the lost. Because love does something. It does something. It has action. And so excuses are indicators that we are spiritually weak and we need to address that about us. That's what excuses are, and we need to see that. But also in this text of Exodus chapter 3, notice verse 14. When he said, I pray thee by the hand of whom thou wilt send, in other words, send somebody else, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Now, what do we learn about excuses as far as God's attitude toward them? They don't work, do they? When they all began to make excuse and the servant went back and told the master, it said he was angry. He was furious about it. Now see, that's what it does to God. Now the Lord was patient. He was patient with Moses. Moses was making these little feeble, weak attempts to get out of this responsibility. And God was patient with him. But God has His limits. He got angry with Moses. Now excuses, young people, excuses might work with mommy and daddy. They will, won't they, Mom? Won't they, Dad? Excuses will work with Mom and Dad. Excuses will work with the teacher. Excuses will work with the boss. You can give the boss an excuse and he'll probably accept something. But beloved, they won't work with God. Excuses don't work with God. He gets angry. He gets mad. Because you see, His will is not being accomplished. His will is not being fulfilled. And that's what He wants. And so whatever your excuses are, they won't work. I'm reminded of the excuse that, about one of the best excuses that we have in the Bible is the one given by King Saul. Remember that one? He came back from the battle with the Amalekites. He was supposed to destroy all of them. He's supposed to destroy every single living person, every living thing. But he didn't. He came back. But when he came back, he says, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, well, what meaneth the bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? Now notice what Saul said, I have obeyed the commandments of the Lord. And Saul, in response to these bleating sheep, these oxen back here, he says, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Oh, I did. I destroyed them. But they didn't destroy them. We did, but they didn't. They brought them back to sacrifice. Well, you remember the answer that Samuel gave to him. Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice. In other words, your reasoning is wrong. Let God be found true and every man a liar. And so excuses will not work. I don't care how good they are. Saul had a pretty good one, I thought. Well, we brought him back to offer as your sacrifice. Well, even to do good when you disobey God, even to try to give honor to God, he disobeyed God. That's kind of like saying, see, he disobeyed God to try to, he said, honor God. We didn't obey God. We didn't destroy these sheep and cattle and everything. But we only disobeyed so that we could do good to God. That's like saying, I robbed a bank to give the money to the church. That don't work, Saul. That don't work at all. And so God was angry. And so if we give an excuse, there's another more serious problem. We're either afraid, we don't have enough love for the Lord, we do not have enough faith in God, or it may be all of those, or it may be we're just lazy. We're like the man over there in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 24. He was a wicked and slothful servant. He was lazy. Well, excuses are not going to be accepted. But let us notice one good thing about Moses. This is the last time we read of Moses trying to offer an excuse. The last time I found an excuse by him. Even in Numbers chapter 20, verses 8 and 9, when he struck the rock and God called him down for that, Moses didn't try to offer an excuse to God. He didn't try to say, well, Lord, I just got mad, I got angry, I got upset, and in the moment I hit the rock. He didn't even try to say that. He didn't make any more excuses after that. And so at the end of his life, here's what we read about Moses. Here's old Moses, old weak, feeble excuse maker that he was. But at the end, It says in Deuteronomy 34 and verse 10, "And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." He became a great man because he stopped making excuses and started doing what God wanted him to do. And that's what we all need to do. I've made excuses. Let's be honest with ourselves. We've probably all done that. We've rationalized why we wouldn't call somebody, why we wouldn't invite someone, why we couldn't do this, it's just impossible for us to knock on somebody's door. We've all made up these little reasons. And here's a man who was trying to do the very same thing, but he stopped in his life. Let's evangelize. Am I supposed to offer the invitation now? We are not evangelizing because we do not have the finances. We do. We're not evangelizing because we do not have training sessions or mobility or education or the means or the time or the talent, or it's not because we don't have the truth. We have all of these things. We have the finances, we have the time, we have the means, we have the training, we have the mobility, we have the talent, we have the truth. There is absolutely no reason why we should not all, young and old, be evangelizing the world for Christ. Excuses, excuses, excuses. Moses tried them. They didn't work, and so he quit using them. Let us learn that lesson as well. They don't work. Let's stop doing that. Let's find the true peace and joy in our lives. It's not through making excuses. I don't believe Moses even felt good about that. I don't think any of us feel good when we try to excuse ourselves. We get the best and most out of life when we obey the will of God.